Welcome back, Canadian Baseball Network fans, to the Canadian Baseball Network podcast. We're going to be changing gears a little bit today. Still sticking with baseball, but we're going to be talking about something that's much more important, as we'll be joined by the executive director and founder of ALS Double, Cherrie-Marie Chiu.
Was lucky enough to meet Cherrie last year at the Strikeout ALS event that the Baseball Zone held in early September. They did it again this year. Neither of us, unfortunately, could make it out to that event. So we've decided to invite Cherrie on the show to talk a little bit about that event, what ALS Double Play, what they do, and want to chat with Cherrie about kind of what they've been able to accomplish. It's really impressive. Obviously, using tragedy as a way to do good is something that requires a lot of strength. So yeah, really looking forward to chatting with her.
Yeah, it's always interesting how baseball can be used for greater purposes and platforms like this. And we will dive into that terrorist event. We'll dive into what ALS is and what people can do to support. So we're really looking forward to talking with Cherrie. We are thrilled to be joined here on the Canadian Baseball Network podcast by Executive Director and founder of ALS Double, Cherrie-Marie Chiu. Cherrie, how's it going?
Great. How are you, Matt?
I'm fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. We got a lot to talk about. But before we kind of dive into the specifics of ALS Double Play and the recent event that the Terriers put on, can you just kind of give us an overview of what ALS is for people that don't know?
Sure. ALS is short for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It's a neurodegenerative disease. So it's a brain disease. And what it is it affects your motor neurons in your brain. And so what happens is those motor neurons die. And as they die, they stop sending signals to your muscles. And strangely enough, only your voluntary muscles. So all the ones that you use to eat, to speak, to walk, to talk, to play baseball, all of those muscles are the ones that are affected by this disease. And so slowly you lose use of your muscles, or sometimes very quickly. And at the end of the day, you do lose your life. ALS is a fatal disease today. There's no cure. And right now we have lots of hopeful treatment, but no effective treatment today.
Yeah, I think you say today. There's no cure today, but I think that's obviously part of what you're trying to push for. So let's talk a little bit about ALS Double Play and what's the purpose of the organization?
Sure. I started ALS Double Play 10 years ago now. And I did so when my brother Christopher became sick with ALS. He was young. At the time, most people who became sick with ALS were men over the age of 50. My brother Christopher was just 32 years old when he became sick. And as a family, we didn't really know much about ALS. We had heard about Lou Gehrig, of course, being a baseball family. We knew who he was, but we didn't understand the disease at all. And so as we began to fundraise as a family for ALS, we realized that the most important thing when you have a disease with no cure and no treatment, the most important thing you can do is help research. And so I left what I was doing at the time, which was management consulting, and I started ALS Double Play so that we could direct the funds that we raised specifically where we wanted it to go. And we could be another voice out there for Canadians, just to speak about ALS, raise awareness, and fund research.
Yeah, so you actually answered my next question, where the idea came from. So obviously you have a very personal connection to ALS. What did you learn throughout the process of you said your brother was diagnosed with ALS. What did you learn throughout that process about the disease that maybe you didn't know beforehand?
Oh, everything. Because I didn't know anything about ALS, everything we learned was new. So just the progression of the disease, it's different for everybody. So with my brother, it started in his limbs. It started in his leg, actually. And he was playing lots of sports at the time. He played volleyball in a rec league. He was reffing baseball and soccer. So he was a very active person. He played golf. And when he started to His reaction times were slow with volleyball, but he was playing beach. So he didn't notice that he was sort of dragging his foot in the sand. Nobody noticed. And it wasn't until later in the spring that he started walking with a limp. And so this was my brother's progression. It's different for everybody. For some people, it can start in the throat and chest. This is called bulbar onset ALS. And if you happen to get this type of ALS, it can travel very quickly. Because breathing is the last thing you lose in ALS. And with bulbar ALS, it starts in your chest and your throat area. It can go very quickly for people with that type of ALS. So they usually say most people who become sick with ALS lose their battle between 18 months and 5 years. And I would say it's very quick for bulbar, like probably about a year.
So obviously you mentioned Lou Gehrig. A lot of people would know that connection to ALS in baseball, but how has well, I guess I'll start with ALS Double Play. You created this organization. So tell me a little bit about your connection to baseball and how that kind of meshed so smoothly to create it.
Okay, so we grew up as a baseball family. My parents were both immigrants to Canada, but loved baseball. And so we grew up listening to baseball on the radio, watching baseball, going to Exhibition Stadium before the Sky Dome, before Rogers Center. It was just ingrained in us. We both played t-ball, softball. My brother played rep baseball. And so the connection, I think, when we were thinking about a name for the charity was easy to do because my brother and I actually were watching Jay's game at the time when we were thinking about names for the charity. And I just kept throwing out like baseball terminology at him to see if anything would stick. And double play was the one that we liked best because we really only do two things. We raise awareness for ALS and we fund research. And we liked the connection to baseball. So that's where ALS Double Play came from.
Yeah, so it sounds like a perfect fit. So with baseball, how has the sport and the association with the sport for you, and just more broadly from your observations, advanced awareness, education, and funding for ALS?
I think for us, we've used baseball as an event. So in past years, I would say, I think it was like in 2015, 2016, when the Jays were having a really great run, we actually brought people out to the game. So we would buy like group seats and bring people out to the game. We'd have everybody wear our t-shirts just so that we could show like we were here for a reason. We're here to support the Jays, but of course we're raising awareness while we're there because we're all wearing these ALS Double Play shirts. And when Lou Gehrig Day in baseball began, we just thought that that was the most amazing thing too, to help us just as another venue because, you know, as the Jays are the only Canadian team in the MLB, it was a really great way to showcase ALS again as another way to raise awareness. And then we had this amazing connection to the baseball zone. So, and that has helped us in recent years also.
Great segue. I feel like you've got my notes in front of you. So the next thing I want to talk about was that the Baseball Zone ALS Double Play event that was put on September 7th. Tell us a
Mhm.
little bit about how that partnership got going and how this year's event went.
So the connection with the baseball zone went through Kevin Horton. We're family friends, and it was just amazing. Like he's always wanted to do an event at the baseball zone, and last year we had the very first event, and that was really super cool. And this year was even bigger with the baseball game, with the 17 and under Terriers versus the coaches. So that was a super fun event to be at, to meet so many more people. We loved that all the Terrier players were around, as well as their family members. We got to meet so many people and actually a few people who have had connections to ALS as well.
Yeah, so you've obviously been around people they've diagnosed with ALS, families of people have been diagnosed with ALS. How important is it from this event perspective to kind of get in on that grassroots level with young people? Because obviously you mentioned a lot of people think it's an older person disease. It happens after 50, but it's really important, I assume, to educate younger people on this disease.
Yeah, I think just being around and being there to talk to people about our story or even share stories of other people that we know that have had ALS is a really powerful thing. We didn't have that at all as a family when we were going through my brother's illness. And I think it really would have helped to speak to someone who understood the struggle. It's really different when you have a disease that's terminal, that can be long term also, and that has no way, you can't really do anything to help the person except make them comfortable. And it's hard for people to understand that, because most people are like, when you get sick, you're like, okay, well, you can get treatment and you're going to get better. But this was a disease where that wasn't going to happen. And if we had people around us that we could talk to about what we were going through, I think that would have made a huge difference. So whether or not someone had a connection, I think knowing people that they might be able to go to in the future should a friend, a family member become sick with ALS, I think that that's a powerful thing.
Yeah, I think for sure. And a lot of people sometimes don't know what to say when something like this happens,
Yeah.
right? So, how important is that education to not only help the people that are dealing with the diagnosis, but also the people that are supporting them? How important is it to kind of educate them on what to expect and how to kind of navigate that?
Yeah, I think there's two big things. One of them was because obviously the person with ALS, they lose muscle mass, they often lose a lot of weight. The way they look changes. And I often heard people say to me, I don't want to remember the person that way. I don't want to remember your brother that way. But to me, that was very selfish thinking because that person, I don't even know if I mentioned this at the beginning, but as your body falls apart around you, as your muscles die and atrophy, your brain is still intact. And so Christopher was still thinking and feeling just like he always did. He just couldn't move and eventually he couldn't speak. And so when people said to me, I don't want to remember him that way, it was very hurtful because they had no idea how much it would mean to Christopher to have them come and visit, whether it is just to sit with him, to watch a Jays game, or to tell him about their life. So, oh, and the other thing is, um, what was it? Sorry. So the other thing is, oh, now today, there are these amazing things. They're called eye gaze machines. And so people with ALS who aren't able to speak are able to use their eyes and a computer to speak for them. The other thing that people tend to do when they're visiting people using these types of machines is read over their shoulder at what is happening on their screen. And they're jumping the gun. So it's like when you are speaking to me and you know what the rest of my sentence is going to be and just sort of jump in and you speak over top of me. That is another thing that's really difficult for people who are using an assistive device like an eye gaze machine. Just you need to be patient. It's a different type of conversation. It's going to take a little bit longer, but these are maybe two things that I would tell people when visiting a loved one who is ill and or using an assistive device.
Cherrie, I got one for you. Just sort of building on that. You mentioned 10 years, right?
Mhm.
What have you learned over the last 10 years about, maybe not just, the disease, but, the community, what a community can do? And I guess sort of just reflecting on the last 10 years of this journey.
So I think in the last 10 years, so much has changed. First, I don't think that we would have been successful as a charity if it weren't for social media. And this is like crazy. Social media has made it so that we can be accessible to people across Canada, across the world, across the US. And it's funny because we used all the different platforms from like TikTok to Instagram, Twitter, now X, and Facebook. And we also have YouTube. And so it's different all the different platforms have different types of groups of people and different communities. So what I'm finding right now on TikTok is there's so many people with ALS who are speaking out and sharing their story. And it's really incredible and it's amazing to connect with all of them. What I'm doing a lot of these days is like trying to keep on top of all these new scientific discoveries, all the new research pieces, because 10 years ago, even when I started the charity, and 15 years ago, when my brother was just diagnosed with ALS, there was one medication and maybe I think three or four clinical trials at the time for ALS. Today, there's like hundreds of clinical trials. And this was primarily due to the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. So all this money was poured into ALS research for the very first time, millions of dollars, which they'd never seen before. And all the clinical trials today are a direct result of what happened 10 years ago with the Ice Bucket Challenge. So I think that is the power of social media. That is the power of group funding and like just sharing our story.
Yeah, I think it's incredible and incredibly important that you share that because sometimes, money gets raised for things. You don't necessarily know if it's having an impact or, where the money goes, but something like that, that's a tangible difference that it's making for people with ALS and their families. So that's definitely awesome for you to share that. And even the technology, how has that kind of changed? You mentioned the eye reading machine. Like that just blows my mind personally.
Oh yeah. Okay,
I,
so if the eye gaze machine is going to blow your mind, there's an even better technology. So basically, they implant these nodes on 240 parts of your brain or something like that. And what it does, it doesn't read language, but it reads how your mind thinks and moves and your facial expressions when you're about to speak, and it guesses your words. And then it goes to a computer screen, and then the computer can read for you. And like the even more amazing part of it is it can do your voice. So I know, like your face. It's so crazy, right? So that technology is even more amazing. So like when my brother was using the eye gaze machine, it was awesome because his personality came out, right? In his words. It came out in his words. But I can't even imagine if we also heard his voice along with his words. That would have just blown my mind for sure.
How meaningful would something like that be when you're dealing with something, so terrible, but to be able to have that, I don't want to say the peace of hearing him speak when you know that he can no longer,
Mhm.
verbally speak, but to be able to hear his voice, how important is that?
Well, it's like you don't lose that piece of him, right? Instead of, not having hearing his voice anymore, it would have been amazing. Yeah.
So where do we stand today? Are there any other things that have been developed or, trials or treatments? Kind of where do we stand on that today for ALS?
I think every day there is a new discovery. What's kind of scary, but good to know, I guess, is that hundreds of genes and proteins in our brain are connected to ALS. That's the problem. So it's not just one thing that goes wrong. It can be multiple things. And that's what's making it a little bit difficult to treat the disease. So you might be able to treat one thing, but not another. So that's not going to really impact the disease as much as you want it to. You might need to target three parts of the brain instead of just one. So things like that, knowing that is really exciting, but also a little bit daunting, right? Because the more we know we don't know. But it's so much more than we knew 10 years ago.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you look down the road, whether it's 5 years, 10 years from now, who knows where we'll, and like you said, we don't have a cure today, but hopefully we do in the near future. And it sounds like there's people a lot smarter than me working on this stuff, which is a good thing. It's just amazing what they can do.
It is so amazing. Yeah.
So I guess my last question is how can people get involved, whether they know someone, have been diagnosed themselves, or just, are passionate about helping people? How can people get involved with either ALS double play or just ALS in general?
So we are in Markham, but we definitely, I mean, we reach out to people from all over the GTA, and our events are generally in the GTA area as well. So we have four main events throughout the year. We do a volleyball tournament because Christopher played volleyball. We have our walk in June, which is ALS Awareness Month in Canada. We have a golf tournament, which is primarily a corporate event, and then we have a yoga event, which is just next month, early next month. So it's a beautiful event, sunset yoga at a winery, have a glass of wine after. I mean, it's a grown-up, beautiful event. So anyone can participate in any of the events. We do a big fundraising day too on the first Tuesday after American Thanksgiving. So it's known as Giving Tuesday. So after Thanksgiving, there's Black Friday, then Black Friday, then Small Business Saturday, and then Cyber Monday. So you're spending lots of money. And then on the Tuesday, you give back. So that's Giving Tuesday. And so we participate in that. It's an online giving platform. And I would say, like, just reach out to us, reach out on any of our social media platforms. We're happy to chat. I mean, especially if you're going through the disease and have no one to talk to, we've got lots of people to connect you with that have been through this awful disease.
Okay, so I lied. So that actually leads to my last question is if people need a support group or someone to talk to, what avenues do they have available to them to do so?
So through their doctor and through the major ALS clinics in the GTA, you should have access to a therapist. So they do group therapy and one-on-one, but oftentimes people don't want to participate in that because it's difficult to go to ALS clinic day in any hospital, especially at the beginning of the illness. You will see many people who are further down the line than you. And that can be really hard to see. My brother stopped going to clinic day because he didn't want to see people sick with ALS anymore. Now, so that's why I'm like, contact us, reach out to us. We're happy to talk because, we've got a lot of people, lots of friends that have now been through ALS that we're connected with that you can speak to. I mean, it can be something as simple as just, chatting about the difficulties of the day, the difficulty of finding a caregiver, because this illness means you need 24/7 care at some point. And that's difficult to find these days.
Yeah, and that's all fantastic information. I think really helpful for people listening. And it's alsdoubleplay.com
That's right.
that they can go to. And we appreciate you so much, Cherrie-Marie, to taking the time today to talk to us about this and shedding some light on all the advancements to look at it a positive light. There's so much going on and so many positives with ALS and the advancement of awareness and funding and research. So we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
What a fantastic conversation about something so important. And it really impressed me how she started this charity, 10 years ago due to her brother being diagnosed with ALS, and just to see how far advancements have come.
Yeah, like when I spoke with Sherry last year at Strikeout ALS at the baseball zone, like there were two things that like really stood out to me. It was sort of like I talked about in the intro, like her brother passed away of this awful disease, and like she turns around and creates this awesome foundation, this awesome initiative, right? And like it takes a lot of strength and a lot of kind of just caring about other people, you know what I mean? Like it's amazing. So what a wonderful thing they do. 10 years, hopefully many more on the horizon. And the other thing that stood out to me was talking about the the ice bucket challenge, right? And how it takes time. And I think I mentioned that on that podcast. Like that was back in 2014, like I remember I did the ice bucket challenge and I was in like grade 8 and not even thinking that now, like 10 years later, that's what is helping fund clinical trials and things and hopefully working towards finding that cure. That's important for people to know because these things take time, right? And a lot of funding and to sort of see from start to we'll call it middle because they're working on these clinical trials. It's amazing. And I think it goes to show just how important it is to participate in these events when you can, spread awareness, read up on what this is and how awful of a disease this is. Because as she mentioned, people think it might be especially for men over the age of 50. Well, that's not the case, right? And she can speak to that, and a lot of people can speak to that.
Yeah, and like I said, you always think you never know where necessarily funding's going, but this is a perfect example of that it can make a difference. Every dollar counts in fighting this disease. And as we mentioned, there's no cure today. I thought it was very impactful that she said there's no cure today. Down the road, with the advancements that we're making, there's no reason to think that hopefully there won't be a treatment one day. But just a very powerful story, turning something so terrible into something so positive and impacting thousands, if not more people, through ALS Double play.
Yeah, and so really appreciative to Cherrie for her time and sharing her story.
Yep, and we'll be sharing ways to get involved with ALS Double play and support and different things as we promote this podcast. We appreciate you listening, and until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to check out Canadian Baseball Network for extensive and comprehensive coverage of the latest in Canadian baseball. And The Baseball Zone, Canada's leading instructional baseball academy and training home to thousands of MLB pro, college, and youth baseball players.